Just a few housekeeping notes. This is an interactive session. So when everybody was joining, we had some music going. We had um, questions, polls. We're going to be having polls throughout the presentation and questions for the chat. We encourage you to chat throughout. But I'd like to ask everyone to just introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, with no acronyms, please, your role, and just share something that has brought you joy recently. For me, if you joined a little early, you might have heard I found a wild hosta in my yard earlier this week, and I'm very excited about that. I'm trying to dig it up and take care of it myself. But many of you watching probably already know a bit about map dynamics, and you know how important associations are to our mission. And that's why it's such a pleasure to introduce to you today our very own CAE, FSAE rising star and all things association geek, Alexis Simono. When Alexis joined Map Dynamics last fall, she brought years of experience from working at an awesome AMS, plus 5 years of marketing, membership, and communication experience in associations. Before COVID-19, Alexis was a key member of our events team who traveled to association events of all kinds across the country. And after COVID struck, Alexis became a key member of our virtual events team and has spent countless hours participating in all manner of virtual events. In addition to attending loads of events online, she has led the charge here at the office for virtual happy hours, lunch dates, show and tell, TED Talks, you name it. And over the past 6 weeks, we have been working with partners in the association space to enhance our virtual offerings, to better support event managers with a major overhaul that will be rolling out this month. And Alexis's efforts have yielded valuable insight for our development process. Alexis has put in a ton of work, and we are very excited to share some great ideas and examples from that with you today. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Alexis and see you in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin. And Austin, if you wouldn't mind writing what we're looking for with those introductions in the chat, just in case people can't get to that slide. Just wanted to point out a couple photos. This year in the top right, Austin mentioned that I've been our virtual party planner. So I've been having a lot of fun in virtual events. And this one on the top is some of my friends from Junior League with a pet show and tell. And I've been to some, full day virtual conferences, or most of the day virtual conferences and webinars galore on this topic. So really excited to talk with you guys today. We've already got a conversation starter going on, but go ahead and throw in some of your favorite virtual networking and meeting activities. I mentioned the dog show and tell. That was really awesome. And we've also been doing some morning coffee pep talks with one of our groups. And it's just a really great way of using creative ways of getting folks together. Let's see. So here's a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. One moment. All right. The next normal, options for your events. We're not able to meet in person, but there's a lot that we can do virtually. Let me go back here. And so we're going to go over the options for full virtual and hybrid. Some of the great ways that we can create awesome experiences with our events is driving engagement with our presenters, the people giving information, attendees, people consuming all that information, corporate suppliers who may be sponsoring your event or exhibiting in a trade show environment. We all kind of come together not only to learn, but to connect with the people who are participating. So creating unique networking spaces is really critical. Here we have a chat going on and people are connecting through that, but there's some other creative ways that you can bring people together virtually using some type of video platform. And we'll go over some examples. And if there's one thing that you take away today, I hope that you are thinking about how you can engage your sponsors in these activities. We're not an official sponsor today, but GSAE has been so gracious in letting us present our new platform and be a part of this conversation, because this is something we really care about. We're invested in the industry, and this is just a great opportunity for us and something that you all can offer your exhibitors and corporate partners with your organizations. So, all right. I've got a couple brain food conversations for you to just kind of think about. You don't really have to make comments, but if you have some thoughts, feel free to share them. So, talking about the sponsorship aspect of your event, marketing budgets are starting to get cut. Maybe a lot of you have already started to see that. What are you doing to make sure that your vendor's investment with your organization is one they value most? Some of your exhibitors might be supporting a lot of other different associations in different states and maybe the national. What are you able to offer your vendors to make sure that their engagement with you is at the top of the list? So, we are all kind of thrown for a loop here. Many organizations have hosted virtual events, if anything, webinars, which are great and very popular, but really transforming your annual meeting or in-person meetings to a virtual space is kind of unthought of. And, I'm really excited about what we can do virtually. I know it's scary for a lot of people who are used to reserving their meeting rooms and setting up the chairs and things like that, but there's a lot of exciting opportunities. So just kind of walking you through some of the things I've seen in the last couple of months. The first article from Associations Now on virtual events was March 12th. And since then, I have seen so many sessions on virtual events. There was a great webinar that ASAE hosted. The ASAE Membership and Communications Conference was last week. And then if you haven't heard of it, I definitely recommend checking out the Non-Duzapalooza event, which was also supposed to be scheduled in person, but this is a great example of a hybrid event. And we'll go over that a little bit in a moment. So you can't meet in person, now what? What are those options? So a virtual event, I'm gonna show you an example in a couple moments. It's basically taking all of your components of your in-person event and putting them in a virtual space. So there's a lot of technology options you have available. Map Dynamics is one. And then, a lot of people are using their learning management systems, LMSs, and maybe just doing what they can to promote their Zoom meetings or WebEx or whatever virtual platform you're using on your website and kind of sharing all that information that you can on your website. So there's a handful of options you have with that all virtual. Hybrid, I'm seeing a lot of conversation about hybrid events. One example is this Non-Duzapalooza event. They had a date for this Thursday, and they decided to push the in-person to September, but they're moving forward with a virtual presentation on the 7th, where they've pre-recorded their sessions and they're bringing people together virtually and continuing that conversation later. Another model for hybrid, what we're seeing is, meeting space might be limited, and so you'll only have a few people that can fit in a conference room. So moving forward with that in-person event, but opening it up to more people virtually. So maybe it's bringing speakers in virtually and broadcasting them in that in-person and virtual environment, or maybe it's having a person live and broadcasting that to the virtual space. So we won't go into too much detail about what that hybrid looks like, but if you have any questions about the engagement aspect, feel free to throw those in the chat. And as I mentioned, we're gonna go through some of those examples throughout the rest of this presentation. I do wanna show you what a virtual environment could look like. So here's that membership and communications conference. This is the platform. So we were able to see the details of each session, who it's available. They have some tracks, and then this launch button opened us directly into the Zoom link. So session, description, speakers and facilitators. They had a exhibitors list with links to the website and contact information. So I don't actually remember, it looks like they were using an LMS for their event, but here's just one example. Excuse me. Here is another example that I wanted to show you. So this is the new Map Dynamics platform, and we have queued up, these are actually kind of random sessions, but imagine this is a virtual event. And so you can just kind of scroll through and see the types of sessions taking place. And, this is basically just the platform. So your organization would go in and populate all the information. And here you can see, you know, again, that session description, presenters, this was recorded. I actually got this from the GSAE website. And it'll open into that YouTube page. Didn't mean to click that. Learn more about your speaker, go back to that session, talk about this in a moment, but here you can attach your handouts, links for more information. And so that's a little bit of what, you know, we're talking about with this virtual event. You know, we've got links to all the speakers, sponsors, marketplace of all your vendors, and then your attendees. So like I said, every virtual, or you can use different virtual platforms. Here's just our example. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a moment. Let me bring this full screen again. We'll get started with another piece of brain food. What if you created something for your virtual event that people will miss when they meet in person? Again, you know, there's a handful of ideas that you, oh, we launched another poll. Did you just launch that, Austin?
Yeah, I just ended our last poll about what people really like and what they're doing with virtual events, and just share the results there. It looks like virtual happy hour is very popular.
Yes. And that's I love that response, because, you know, there are these really great and creative ways that you can engage people virtually, but the happy hour is really popular. So, you know, I love making things unique and special, and sometimes just the regular old happy hour does the trick for people. I've seen that with our office. You know, we've tried to host some creative events, but people are just fine getting together and chatting. So it's kind of reassuring. All right, we'll close this out. Okay. So the next normal, we're talking about you can't meet in person, now what? So you are looking at these, I'm looking at Carly's comment about the fact that this group likes happy hour. Who doesn't love a happy hour? And of course, one served with beer. But, you know, so talking about creating awesome experiences in virtual events, how can you recreate the best pieces of an in-person event virtually? So what is your virtual hallway? What kind of spaces are you creating for people to connect? You know, the chats are awesome. Is there a way that you can kind of drive people off and keep those conversations moving in your online community or in a discussion forum after the fact, and making sure they know how to get there? And then, of course, those meaningful connections, and just, like I said, keep those conversations moving. This here is a picture of me at the FSAE annual last year with some of my pals. And yeah, so here's another question for the chat. Cheers and rice. I don't know what that means. But what is one challenge your team is facing as it relates to hosting virtual events? So throw those in the chat, and maybe we'll have a chance to chat about those. Austin, do you have anything to add right now?
Yeah, I just wanted to share some results from earlier with our first question. I didn't quite get a chance, but the favorite way for people to engage in online events seems to be people like to scan the chat, but mostly pay attention to the presentation.
Wow.
With a whopping 90% of respondents into that. So it's nice to build in, I think, these little breakpoints so that we can all kind of catch up on what's going on, what people are saying.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin. Stop sharing. Okay. Yeah, I'm playing with these features for the first time. It's kind of neat what you can do with Zoom. So we're going to start off talking about presenters. So your presenters are your gateways to the content, right? They're the ones that kind of bring your speaker or your attendees in. Your attendees really want access to this information that they have to share. So they're kind of the star of the show in some ways. So lots of things that you all are probably used to doing with your events, but something to keep in mind since this is a virtual experience is making sure that you're not overlooking your speaker's experience with technology. So if you can host a tech training in advance, one option is maybe pre-record that session and show it live, let your speaker engage in the chat, and just makes them feel more comfortable, especially when you never know how many people are going to be present. Something that you can use to keep control. This is a space where you could work with your presenters to make sure that they're using engaging features, so those polls, discussion questions, or even breakout features. I love this idea and opportunity, and hope that I'll get to do this soon, but you can offer volunteers and staff to serve as live chat facilitators and moderators. So I have Austin in here today, but if your organization is hosting a topic, this is a great way to bring in your exhibitors and sponsors and allow them to open up the conversation and engage people during an event. You know, you're working with some, salespeople in your who are your exhibitors. They're great at engaging people, and a lot of times they're part of the conversation anyway with the products that they're offering. All right, so here's an example, as I already kind of showed you, of kind of keeping all the materials in one place. You can, like I mentioned, you can use your LMS for this, you can use your website. This is the Map Dynamics tool and how we kind of keep everything together. So we've got our speaker information, that link to the recording and or that live presentation, additional resources, links to that handout. I linked to the event page. And then this is what we offer on the back end. So the speakers can actually upload materials directly to that page, and just kind of keeps things off the hands of the event managers and lets the speakers have control, because as I'm sure you know, your speakers are getting their PowerPoint presentations in at the last minute, and that's the last thing you really want to worry about when you're coordinating a bunch of speakers during the day. All right, so here, let's check in and get some feedback from what we're seeing on the chat. And here's your next question. What's the most interesting thing you've seen in a Zoom meeting? Hopefully nothing too embarrassing here, but I know that we've all been experiencing different stuff. I've got a dog, and she loves to bark like crazy during my presentations. And I'm actually really surprised and glad that she's staying quiet today. Austin? Did I lose you?
Nope. Seen a lot of good things in the chat with challenges from virtual events. Mike was asking about if there's a fear from that people will like virtual too much and decrease the value of in-person events, but I don't know if there's any replacement for in-person events overall. There's certainly, I think, going to be, for the foreseeable future, a need to enhance or accompany in-person events with good virtual options. But it's just like you can't eat virtual food. You can't really replace virtual events and experiences. They're just additional or different, I think. But I'm trying to see if anybody, enthusiastic nose picker in one of the webinars. Oops, that's when you turn off your camera. That's why I've got mine turned off, so people can't see me bouncing back and forth between polls and whatnot.
That's so embarrassing. All right, cool. Well, Mike, I love your enthusiasm that virtual events will be so successful. I have optimism and enthusiasm myself, but I think the most exciting thing is, as many of you know, not all of your members are attending your annual events. And so this is a way of lowering that opportunity cost for bringing your members together and offering them the content that your association provides. And so I think that it's an exciting opportunity to kind of rethink the way that we're not even offering a virtual conference, but those webinars and things like this that we're doing. So I like your positivity, Mike. Okay, I moved very quickly. What did I just do? I moved to the last slide. So one moment, please. All right, so attendees. So I'm glad Mike's on here. So Mike and I are the worst examples, or maybe the best examples, of conference and exhibitors and attendees, because we're just so excited about everything, and we probably take up the information as best as we can. We're very engaged. We can't always count on all of our attendees to be like that. So there's a couple of things you can do to kind of make sure that you're giving them that experience. As I mentioned earlier, what can you do to make to bring the best parts of your events to life? maybe you can't have a massive crowd with big lights and streamers and explosions. But this is the time to be creative. What can you do to bring that experience to life? How can you maybe create a virtual registration booth where they actually meet with one of your staff members to register for the event or kind of get an introduction to the technology tool you're using. And yeah. Yeah, if you guys have any ideas of ways you can, set the stage for your event, throw some of those ideas in the chat. Some of you, I hope all of you got an email from Jenny before this event. We kind of had a summary of things to expect, right? We're going to be using Zoom. Here's a video to prepare you, make sure you know. They also had an example of some of those Zoom tips to make sure that you know kind of the gallery view and the speaker view. I mentioned this is going to be an interactive session, kind of warming you up for those conversations to be had in this group chat. And then, of course, keeping the conversation moving. So encouraging people that this is going to be interactive. This is not going to be me just talking at you, although that's kind of necessary when delivering information, but making sure that your attendees are engaged is really important, and preparing them so that they're ready for that engagement. You're going to see this little yellow line underneath some of these points that I have. And that is something that you can sponsor. So I mentioned everything is sponsorable. You can basically throw sponsor logos and create packages in a lot of these different things that you're offering in your virtual event and maybe even your in-person event. So here's a list of some of the things that you can include when preparing your attendees. But the biggest thing is just ease that stress, set them up for an awesome experience. All right. So encourage participation. Why is there a llama on my screen? Have any of you heard of the it's goat to meeting? I know there's a lot of different animal sanctuaries who are offering their animals to be presented on a screen during your meeting. So it's a nice way to kind of shake things up, make things interesting. Again, that's something that you can invite a sponsor to support. But, as I mentioned, invite people to introduce themselves, switch up that presentation style, bring in those polls. And then, when you're looking at a very large group, fair warning that the chat can move really quickly. So while you're in the middle of reading something, it's like 20 more comments that you're missing. So, it's great to see engagement like that, but just something to keep in mind as you're kind of setting up those discussion questions and how you want people to engage. In addition to large groups or small groups, having a pre or post forum to encourage conversation, I think is a really awesome way to make your event not just kind of a point in time, but part of a larger conversation. I mean, virtual events, this is a massive topic for a lot of people. And whatever you can do to kind of keep those conversations going will be really helpful. Smaller groups, whether you're creating smaller groups from your large group or just having a smaller group like we have today, if you're using the breakout feature, a comfortable conversation size is 3 to 5 people. Just think about if you're at happy hour, how many people do you end up kind of creating these side conversations with? It's a really great tool to use, but just make sure that you're keeping the group small so people feel comfortable sharing. As I mentioned with Austin, we have a chat facilitator who's part of that conversation, and we've got those pre-planned questions that we're asking. And last, if you kind of have everybody participating, maybe with their cameras on, having somebody to call on people and ask them if they haven't spoken up in a while. If you've noticed with some of your happy hours, you basically have one person talking, and sometimes you do kind of have to invite that conversation because it's hard to talk over people when you're in when your video cameras are on. All right. So here's my question. What do your exhibitors value most about their participation with your event? So while you guys are getting those votes in, Austin, you want to highlight some of the stuff that we're seeing in the chat?
Yeah, there's a lot of good back and forth going on about hybrid events and how people can interact. Mike was asking about if people that are attending in-person events and virtual events can interact, and while every tool to support an event will be different, I know at least with Map Dynamics we're building discussions for future virtual or hybrid events. So this will enable attendees to open discussions with each other, for exhibitors to have discussions with attendees, for speakers to have discussions with attendees, and for there to be hosted discussions on sessions, or just in general for the event. So you could have a hosted discussion or sponsored discussion, just public discussion, so people can contribute to what's going on in a session. So if somebody's attending a session and they miss out on another one, they can go back and see what people were saying about it. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say digestible, but it's um, it's not like a chat is just flying past you real fast. People can go back and view the discussions that occurred around separate sessions during an event. So even if that was an in-person event and that was discussion being held about an in-person session, somebody who's attending virtually or watching, from a Zoom webinar that's in the session profile, they can still, the people that are there in person or the people that are watching from home can all join in the same discussion about what's going on. Just launched another poll about what exhibitors value most about the participation in an event. If people would like to respond to that one.
Yeah, we can come back to that one after this next section, Austin. Does that work?
Yeah.
Logistically? Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure. Okay, so virtual trade show. I know trade shows aren't part of every event, but they are part of a lot of our events and the way that associations bring in revenue. So here are some ideas to make your trade show a success if virtual. And again, regardless of the platform you're using, this is you can always promote your exhibitors leading up to the event. So how are you introducing your exhibitors to your attendees? How are you showcasing your sponsors? How are you making sure that your attendees know what they need, or kind of have their mind set up and what they're looking for when they show up to the actual trade show floor? And while we may not have a in-person trade show floor, you may have a list of all of your exhibitors. And so, as Austin kind of talked about, how create space for exhibitor discussion, make that a low opportunity cost. Well, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here at the poll. We're going to share that later. It just popped up on my screen. So what are ways that you can create kind of these easy conversations with your exhibitors? Appointment scheduling tools are really handy. I use Calendly. There's also one, Austin, called
off the top
okay,
of my head, I can't remember.
we can come back to it. If you
Yeah.
remember, go, okay, Acuity, Jeremy
Acuity.
typed it
Yeah,
in there. So
Acuity.
there's
Thanks,
a
Jamie.
handful of options out there, but this is part of that training that you can offer your exhibitors and say, if you want to encourage people to schedule appointments, here's a tool. There are free options with Calendly and I think Acuity as well, but they can maybe be using their own tool, or it's just a recommendation that you offer to them. And then like I mentioned, our tool will have a discussion feature as well, like a chat feature. I love this idea. I learned this in one of the virtual event sessions I participated in, but offer your attendees a discount for participating in different types of activities with your exhibitors. So if they agree to set a meeting or view a meet and greet and a demo, or maybe even if they just fill out a survey about what they're looking for and attending that trade show, give them a discount. And that's great data to bring back to your exhibitors and just kind of make sure that people are attending. I know with an association I used to work with,
Yeah,
they
speaking
were
of
sharing poll
surveys,
results.
yeah, speaking of surveys there, Alexis, it looks like, no surprise, but connecting attendees with other solution providers is the big one that everybody's concerned about there.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin. Oh, I don't know why this happens. All right, cool. I'm going to close this out. Again, new experiences here. All right, so, and then we are also talking about networking. Okay, the poll results are nice and poppy. They pop up on the screen. Okay, cool.
It's interactive.
So, yeah. So we were talking about that. Yeah. So totally virtual. You can probably use a lot of these same examples, but maybe instead of this one day trade show experience, you can keep your marketplace open for a period of time. So a marketplace being the list of all your exhibitors. Gamify engagement. I know a lot of trade show managers have really awesome ways of encouraging exhibitors or attendees to stop by their exhibitor booths. You know, you play bingo or scavenger hunts, or maybe even get points if you schedule a certain number of meetings. There's a lot of tools that you can use, and if you have an example, feel free to show that in the chat. But I know that's a hot topic. And then within your actual schedule, if you already have your education set up, you can also invite your vendors to be a part of that programming. So some examples are schedule some demo or pitch sessions. Meet and greets is probably a little bit more comfortable for your attendees. And how can you, give maybe a 5 to 10 minute block of time during your schedule and have people sign up for those. And so your vendor can actually have a larger group when presenting, instead of doing it individually if they opt in for it. Solution circles is a great tool to use for a smaller group and creating that engagement and participation. So maybe your solution provider or corporate partner like Map Dynamics, is actually having a conversation, opening it up and letting people talk about what they're doing to host a virtual trade show or whatever that topic is for your organization. And of course, the sponsor piece. And as you can see, my gold line is under the virtual trade show option because this is a great way to bring in that revenue. I'm going to take a moment to show you an example of how we have that set up in Map Dynamics. So you can see an example of how you can set this up with your event using, I showed you the exhibitor list with the membership conference, and maybe you can set this up on your website. But here is an example. So we've got this marketplace here, and we're going to pull up Hyatt Regency Savannah, which I know is one of the GSAE sponsors. So description about their organization, a contact, somebody who's going to be a representative. If they have videos, they can actually embed directly in here. This is your Amir speaking to from the April luncheon last month. And then that session that they're supporting, which I already built in the April luncheon. As Austin mentioned, and I've mentioned, having these passive ways of engaging is really kind of helping, not encouraging videos, but just kind of the chat. So maybe whether your event is virtual or in person, you're going back to your hotel room or you're not actively at your computer, you can engage in a little chat that's a little bit easier to participate in, and get the information you need about Hyatt Regency Savannah, and learn a little bit more about Cheryl, as an example. So, all right, I think we have another poll coming up. We got our polls a little out of order, but that's okay. So what are some virtual sponsorship examples you have tried or seen?
Yeah, I think the wording is just a little bit different from the question from how it is on the slide. Favorite type versus. All
right. So as with real events, kind of got to roll with the flow in virtual events as well. Yeah. So let's talk about some of these creative networking opportunities while y'all are filling out this poll, and we'll check in after we go over this. So highlighting, here's a list. I'm not going to read them all to you, but some of my favorites, as we've seen in the poll before, is that open happy hour, coffee, snack time, something simple, get people together, and remember, engage a facilitator, keep that conversation moving. And then some of, I mentioned the solution circles. It doesn't have to be with a vendor. You can just invite some of your members to throw an idea and set it up around these ideas that you're seeing. There's a lot of really great virtual tools for games and TED Talk discussions. I was talking about these ideas with one of my friends, and I thought that was a really clever idea. So maybe it's getting some of your members to just share ideas, or presenting some of that content in a TED Talk kind of format. And again, we're seeing that gold bar. All of these can be sponsored. You can engage your partners in these types of events and have them set it up. So what are we seeing from the poll?
Sorry, I took that off. I think we got a little bit of mismatch between our poll questions and our slide. So I turned that one off.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, we were just a little bit behind. So Austin, can you relaunch that poll for us?
Sure. The virtual sponsorship examples you've tried. Excellent. I'm going to relaunch that now.
So before we relaunched it, we had about 7 people selected those sponsored sessions. So really easy and popular option, but it looks like we're not seeing sponsored playlists or sponsored discussion topics. So I'm curious if you want to throw it in the chat, do you feel comfortable hosting sponsored discussion topics? Is that an option for your organization? And if not, the playlist, are there maybe some other unique sponsorships that your organization has tried, whether that be virtual or in person, and something that maybe you can make in a virtual experience? So maybe not some experience yet, but hopefully you're getting some good ideas.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have taken an approach to open things up, for free in a lot of these things. But as people get settled in with hybrid and virtual events, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to have more sponsored sessions coming back.
So I wanted to answer Jacob's question about the virtual TED Talk as a creative networking opportunity. So I got this idea from a session that I have attended, and it was recommended as a way to get your attendees or your members to show up to an event for the sponsorship opportunity, but of course something that's valuable and helpful. So we did this in our organization, in Map Dynamics, where I just came up with a TED Talk to share with our team. So my topic, of course, was why associations are so important to the world, and talked a little bit about what the world without associations would look like. So, it could look different for your organization. So Jacob, I think you're with the BOMA. So, is there a creative idea that people in your organization are talking about? Can you give them, maybe set up 2 or 3 sessions and have people, join in a conversation and listen to what they have to share? I mean, the concept of TED Talks is ideas worth sharing. So, that's a great way of starting a conversation with your members. Does that help, Jacob? Awesome. So if anyone else has done a TED Talk, or whether association related or not, I'd love to see some of those examples if you want to sync up later. So again, we're getting those poll results. Looks like everybody's trying those sponsored sessions, and maybe a handful of us haven't had a chance to try it yet. So yeah, Jacob, I think that the key there is it's a conversation starter, or it can be a conversation starter, depending on how you execute it. One moment. All right, cool. So this is, I think, one of my last slides. Everything can be sponsored. We've shared a handful of ideas of ways you can engage your presenters, your attendees, your sponsors, your exhibitors in these virtual events. So something you can do right now is inventory all of your ideas and then maybe also your assets and opportunities. So what are those creative ways you can bring your members together? One of the creative networking ideas was the special interest groups. What are you doing to again, bring people together? Your assets may be the services you're already offering, and the white papers or collection of webinars that you have. How can you bring them back to the forefront of what your organization's offering and create a new sponsor prospectus? So, maybe you just want to throw it out to all of your sponsors, or maybe you want to bring in those top level sponsors that have already proven themselves to be involved. Maybe bring in some of those folks that haven't been very involved and give them new opportunities to engage with your organization. I have association background, but I'm an exhibitor now. I want to connect with the people that I get to do business with. I don't want to just shake their hand at a trade show. I want to learn about where they are in their jobs and how they're solving problems, what they're struggling with. That's important to me because I work with these people, once they agree to work with us. So this is a really awesome opportunity to have a low opportunity cost of getting people together on these conversations. So threw in the couple sponsorship add-ons, things you can throw in to not just your event, but things you host throughout the year. So a couple to highlight is those wine and beer tasting. I know GSAE members could get really excited about that. Food delivery, depending on the type of group you're getting together, whether it be, maybe a CEO dinner during your conference, engage your sponsors and have them, offer a voucher or even set up the delivery themselves, which might have some issues, but it's just an idea. And then I also love the podcast idea, and that a lot of organizations, as you're seeing, are solving problems for their industry, not just their members. So how can you create content for your industry at large, bring them into the awesome services and content your organization provides, and create value for one of your sponsors? So in my opinion, it's a win-win. I know capacity is always an issue in small staff organizations, but a lot of opportunity there. So that is the last slide that I have, except bringing that one back for the chat. And about one more thing. All right, thank you. So I'm gonna take a scan through the chat, bring some conversations. We've got about 15 minutes left in our session. So if you would like to throw in a question that you'd like us to talk about, we can invite more people to chat with us. So Austin, if you are reading the chat, would you like to recognize some of the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, Lowell had a good question, and Jeremy and Mike are having some good discussion about it, about, providing opportunities for sponsors to give something that's not a hard sell, for attendees, so that both attendees and sponsors get something out of it. And I love what I'm seeing here from folks.
It looks like maybe that question was asked before I kind of went off on how cool it is as an exhibitor or as a corporate partner to be involved in these kinds of conversations. And GoGo is sharing that this is where discussion boards come in, because maybe not everybody wants to have their camera on and engage in these conversations, but being involved in that discussion board allows you to just kind of share a little note or maybe ask a question.